One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome to the second podcast of 2023. How are you guys doing so far on your resolutions? Are you back in the gym? Are you on a diet? Let me know what's going on. Check me out on Instagram is probably the best way to do that. And you can just shoot me a note and let me know how you're faring with your New Year's resolutions. The last episode, I told you that I was going to start talking about this thing called autonomous health. The word autonomy, if you're not familiar with it, just simply means independence, like you're under your own control, your own sovereignty, if you will. And the whole idea of autonomous health is to understand enough about how your body works and how health and well-being works, that you can make a lot of your own decisions on your own. I truly believe that 80% of what people need to do to be healthier is completely under their control. And they don't need to seek the counsel and the guidance of certainly not medical doctors. And it's not because I hate medical doctors, and I certainly don't hate modern medicine. Lord knows that I've used my share of medications and had multiple joint surgeries. So there's no way that I could sit here in integrity and tell you that allopathic or conventional medicine is bad when I myself have used it. That's not the point. The point is that when you start to look at the main influences over your health and your well-being, most of those are what we call phenotypic expressions. And it's a fancy word, and it's related to your genotype or related to genetics. But let me explain the difference between the two. Your genotype is basically your genetic profile, right? You inherit genes from your mother, from your father. And so you have a collection of genes that basically govern and determine every biological and chemical and physical process in your body. But a lot of genes are in a latent state, meaning they're not active. And so we have genes that are turned on and genes that are turned off, for lack of a better way of explaining it. Some people liken genes to light switches, right? Light switch is either on or it's off. And so while the genotype basically tells you the world of possibility, things that might happen if these genes get activated, if the light switch gets turned on, for lack of a better term, then what's called the phenotype is basically the profile of the genes that do get turned on. And let me just give you a simple example. I'm going to use silly numbers just because it's easier to wrap your head around the number 10 than it is to wrap your mind around the millions of different genes and the infinite number of combinations and permutations that your genes turning off and on can actually present to you. It's really quite staggering when you start to think about the potential of all the different genetic profiles that can be either turned on or turned off. But let's say that you have 10 genes, and each gene has two possibilities. A gene can either be turned on and turned off. Well, you might have somebody who has the first 5 genes in the on position, the last 5 genes in the off position. You might have somebody who has the first 8 in the off position and the last 2 in the on position. Or maybe somebody has every other gene in the on position and every other gene in the off position. And there's any number of combinations. But basically, the difference between your genotype and your phenotype is the difference between the world of possibility and the world of actuality. So your phenotype is the sum total of all the genes that could turn on being turned on. And this phenotypic expression is what accounts for the fact that we are all the same, but we are all actually fundamentally different as well. Just because you and I both have the human genome and we both have probably very similar genotypes, our genetic expression, the sum total of genes that are turned on in my body versus your body, can be radically different. And this accounts for why some people can be genetically predisposed to things like heart disease or dementia states or insulin resistance or liver cancer or fill in the blank with pretty much anything that you want. And so in reality, to get back to this term phenotypic expression, your phenotype is your genetic possibilities filtered through the influence of your diet, your lifestyle, and how you interact with the environment that you live in. Those are the main drivers of what we call phenotypic expression. And we're at the point now where we've basically concluded as a collective scientific community that your health and your well-being is a phenotypic expression. So whether you are obese or lean, whether you are, well, height has nothing to do with health and well-being, but whether you have insulin resistance or you don't, whether you have problems with pancreatic enzyme production or you don't, whether you have gallbladder problems or you don't, these are all happening as a result of, again, the sum total influence of diet, lifestyle, and environment. And a lot of these things are under your control. They are variables that you can manipulate and you can change. And a lot of the genes that end up turning on in disease states, or let's say states of unwellness, are genes that can be coaxed into turning off, or at least modifying their activity by making different choices. And I know in the last episode, I encouraged you as you launch into 2023, and you're probably engaging in some kind of resolution to eat better, exercise more, whatever it is that's relevant and personal to you. And I encourage you to just simply make the next right choice. There are probably some things that are quite obvious to you, choices that you know you should make, you've just been putting them off, or things are getting in the way for whatever reason. And so going back to that idea, I would suggest to you that in your quest to be healthier and have a better quality of life in 2023, start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with the obvious things. For example, and gluten gets a bad rap, and for good reason. If you're not gluten-free, go gluten-free. Let's see what happens with that. Maybe you add in dairy, and so you go gluten and dairy-free, and you pursue that for a matter of weeks, if not months, just to see the impact that it has on your body. And hopefully you couple that with other good decisions, like going gluten and dairy-free, and then you're going to start getting up early and going to the gym, as an example. So the concept of your phenotype helps us understand that there are changes and choices that we can make that basically pull the levers of dietary influence, pull the levers of environmental exposure and reactivity, and pull the levers of lifestyle modification. And those things are under your power. And getting back to the point that I made earlier is that, you don't really want to go to your medical doctor or someone who's trained in conventional medicine for these types of decisions, or to see what you should do, simply because they're not trained in it. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't care about you. It's just, honestly, for most of them, it's not their job. That's just not what they're there for. And so as we start to talk about the principles that underlie the concept of autonomous health, and again, what is autonomous health? It's being relatively independent of what appears to be a broken healthcare system. And I say broken simply because allopathic medicine does not deal well with things like diet and lifestyle and environmental impacts on health and well-being. They're great at emergencies. They're great at surgical requirements. They're great at managing established diseases, particularly in people who are not willing or wanting to go through the process of changing diet, lifestyle, and environmental exposures. But nevertheless, when you really boil it down to it, allopathic and conventional medicine has a very important place in the healthcare continuum, but they can't do everything. They can't be everything to all people. And so autonomous health is being relatively independent of the allopathic conventional system, because there's so much that's under your control, and you don't want to just give over. Like I think about my parents and my grandparents who, quite literally have their I should say had, because all but my dad has passed at this point. But even my dad, who's still around, he just turned 85 on January 1st. He was a New Year's baby. And so he just turned 85. And even though I've been, gained some degree of expertise and notoriety, if you will, in the field of natural medicine, my dad still doesn't listen to pretty much anything that I say. And he's got his medical doctors up on a pedestal. And if what I suggest to him about a certain issue differs from what the medical doctor says, then he's going to do what the medical doctor says to do, just simply because that's how he's lived his entire life, thinking that medical doctors pretty much know everything about health and well-being. And if they don't know it and they don't say it, then it's not something that's really valid, and it's not true. So again, don't mistake me. I don't want to come across as being someone who's anti-medication or anti-surgery or anti-allopathic medicine, but I do believe in using the right tool for the right job. And if you have problems that are modifiable, perhaps even preventable, by making better choices in the realms of diet, lifestyle, and environmental exposure, then I think you're obligated to do that, unless you simply just want to abdicate that and embrace a model that says, for every ill, there's a pill. That's kind of an old saying, but you may have heard that before, right? For every ill, there's a pill. And just kind of give over and become completely and entirely dependent on a system that's just focused on disease management, because that's really what it is. I mean, you've heard this before. I know you have. We don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease management system. It is what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. Let's understand its value and where to put it in the continuum of healthcare. But let's start taking ownership of our own health and wellness and start making better choices. So there are a lot of principles, again, that underlie this idea of becoming relatively independent of a broken system, autonomous, if you will, so autonomous health. And we'll get to those. But I thought that what I would do is I would start with what I call the frustration matrix. And I have a question on my intake form that asks potential clients, people who apply to work with me on a one-on-one basis. I want to understand what their perspective is on conventional medicine, because there are some, it's not often, but every once in a while I get someone who contacts me who really doesn't know much about natural health or their diet or even what someone like me does. And so they're just kind of dipping their toe in the pool, so to speak. And they really still kind of revere their conventional doctors. And some of them command much respect because they do very good work. But the question goes something like this, like, what's your attitude? And it's a multiple choice. You can pick whichever box applies. And you'll see statements like, I understand that medical or conventional medicine doesn't have all the answers, but I'm not ready to completely divorce myself from them. Something like that. It's phrased differently, but you get the idea. And then there's an option that says, the conventional system has failed me, and I need better answers and better results. And so there is consistently, at least with the people that I interact with, there is a prevailing theme of frustration with conventional medicine. And it's not unusual. I don't know what the average is, but it's not unusual for a potential new client of mine to have seen 7, 8, 9 different medical doctors and to be struggling with health issues for years, if not decades. The highest number of medications I remember working with a client on was like 19 different medications. And it was a lady who was in her late 50s, early 60s. She had a team of specialists. She basically saw almost every specialist in the book, and every specialist that she was seeing put her on 1 or 2 medications. And when we started looking at things differently, she was able to come off the medications with the guidance of her medical doctors. Sometimes she's made the decision on her own, but just to be clear, as a chiropractor, I do not have the scope of practice to tell people to take or not take medications, and so I don't do that. But I can educate them about how their body operates and what's wrong, and help them ask the right questions of their prescribing physicians so that they can make a decision. Is this an appropriate medication, or should we start to look at changing things? And so we were quite successful. In fact, over a period of about 6 months, that list of 19 different medications started to winnow down to the point where the last I remember was she was on 5. And that's a radical change. Like, that's massive in the world of pharmacy. And one of the problems with that is that it's somewhat difficult enough to predict how one medication is going to interact with one person's body. Like, a lot of medications are very well tolerated by most people. I don't believe medications are free of side effects. So I think you always pay the price, particularly if you're on something long term. It's hard enough to predict how one medication affects somebody. It's that much more difficult to predict how 2 or 3 medications might interact with each other in an individual person's body. It is, I'm telling you, it is statistically impossible to predict the outcome of what we call polypharmacy, being on 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 different medications at the same time. And it's a modern tragedy. It's just it's a problem, and that's part of how conventional medicine is broken. It's this almost complete ignorance of the impact of health, wellness, and again, environmental exposures, or at least the lack of preparation, lack of education and training in the largest sector of the healthcare community, because there's a lot more medical doctors than there are doctors that do things like I do, including medical doctors that do things like I do. So before we launch into the whole concept of autonomous health, I want to talk about where the frustration comes from, because it's so prevalent. And you may have found yourself in your own mind asking questions like, if my lab tests are normal, why do I still feel so bad? And you'll hear that all the time from doctors, like, oh, we ran these tests and everything comes back normal. And we'll end up talking about that as we go through, because one aspect of the frustration matrix, as I call it, is normal is not normal anymore, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. But what about this question? And have you ever said to yourself, like, I don't feel sick, I just don't feel right, quickly followed by, and my doctor doesn't know what to do with me? That's a very common one as well. I've had people tell me, like, I'm not going back to my medical doctor because all he or she does is push pills. I don't want another prescription. I want to know what's wrong. I hear that one a lot. And then also, tragically, you hear things like, they keep telling me it's all in my head, and I'm starting to think they're right because nobody has answers and every test comes back, quote unquote, normal. So frustration comes from several different things. And I'll tell you, number one, yes, there are people out there that make stuff up. We call them malingerers, but I've been doing this since like 1995. And if I've met 2 or 3 legitimate fakers in my career, that would probably be an overestimate. Most people that I have worked with in some capacity who are suffering and who have been told that it's all in their head have real problems. It's just that whoever they're working with can't see it because they only think a certain way. They have a certain perspective or lens that they look through, and they can't see certain types of problems, and they certainly can't find certain appropriate solutions because of their bias, because of their presuppositions, because of their education, because of their training. So chances are, if you're listening to this and you've heard some of those things from your doctor, chances are your symptoms are real. Chances are you are not crazy. But chances are you might simply be looking for answers in the wrong place. You just might be barking up the wrong tree, again, for lack of a better way of saying it. So what is the frustration matrix? Well, there's kind of 4 parts to that. And we'll probably deal with the first 1 or 2 as we get to the end of this particular episode, because I don't want to go too long. But I think it's important to talk about, like, understand why you're frustrated and understand the place that conventional medicine should hold in your armamentarium, whichever way you pronounce that. So what is the frustration matrix? Number 1, what I call the paradigm mismatch. Number 2, the conventional system has very black and white thinking, but we live in a world of gray. Number 3, normal is not normal anymore. And number 4, what is disease? What is dis-ease? Disease is really lost wellness. And how you define it, what you see, and how you try to solve a problem of disease or loss of wellness is, again, really going to depend on, do you see disease as something to be managed, or do you see disease as wellness lost and ask the question, well, how do I get it back again? Those are 2 different ways of trying to tackle the same problem. So let's talk for the remainder of this episode. Let's talk about this thing called the paradigm mismatch. And this is probably not something that you're going to find if you Google it, just simply because this is something that I came up with in my own thought process, trying to understand why so many people I talk to and work with are so frustrated. And then after several years of being in practice and seeing the frustration, it started to dawn on me that there is this thing called a paradigm mismatch. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is a way of thinking. It's a way of doing things. And so here's where the paradigm mismatch, here's where it lives, and here's what it looks like. Like, you are probably looking for health and well-being. Your medical doctor is looking for disease. They're not looking for health. When they run diagnostic labs, they run imaging studies, whether it's MRI, CAT scan, X-ray, whatever, they're looking for disease. And if they don't find it, they tell you everything is normal. So you're looking for health, you're looking for well-being, they're looking for disease. They're not looking for health. And so that's the first mismatch. And the second mismatch is that more than likely, I think, given the option, most people would make the choice to get better naturally rather than using things like drugs or surgery, which is how your medical doctor is trained. Now, listen, I know that there are medical doctors that think out of the box. They are, they're the redheaded stepchild of medicine. They don't think the same way. And these are docs that quite often abandon their true allopathic career and get into things like alternative or complementary medicine. And terms like alternative medicine, complementary medicine, integrative medicine, natural medicine, functional medicine, they're all kind of related. They can be used in different ways, but unfortunately, there's no governing organization that defines what these words mean. And so someone can say they do functional medicine as I do, but they don't do the same thing that I do. And so we're using the same term in different ways. So you have to be careful. Like, what do you mean by you do integrative medicine, for example? But like I said, most people, given the option, would choose to get better naturally rather than take a medication. Again, not that medications across the board are wrong, but I do believe that there's no such thing as medication that doesn't have a side effect. Sometimes the side effects are short-term, sometimes they're minor, sometimes people can handle it very well. But when you start getting into long-term use of medications to manage disease processes, you marry that with polypharmacy, being on multiple medications, and you marry that with somebody who's not making the next right choice with their diet, with their lifestyle, or with how they're interacting in the environment that they live in, then that spells trouble. And so you end up getting frustrated because you keep trying to solve the same problem with the same thought process, which is not what you're looking for. And again, I might miss my guess, but I think if you're listening to this podcast, you want to be healthy. You're not going to be satisfied with the absence of disease, because you can have no disease and still be unwell. And that's why I make a distinction between those and understand that what you're really looking for is not just to not have a disease. You want to be healthy. You want a good quality of life. You want to have your well-being restored to whatever it was, whatever point in life where you define, like, hey, back then I was rocking it. I felt great. I had good energy. I had stamina. I had endurance. My mood was in control. My brain was working. My sleep was great. My gut was great, whatever the case might be. And that brings up another point that's quite related to this, is that health is not simply the absence of disease. Health is the presence of a vitality that you lose when metabolic processes go wrong, which ultimately can end up in a disease state. And so with the paradigm mismatch, if you truly are looking for health and well-being and looking to restore that vitality, and you would prefer to do it naturally, then why are you still looking for answers from people who don't do that? Again, your medical doctor is looking for disease to manage, not health to restore or support. And they're trained to use predominantly drugs and surgery in their quest to do that. And so it's almost like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, or a square peg into a round hole. Ultimately, at the end of the day, here's how you know you're frustrated. You walk out of your doctor's office with more questions than when you walked in, or still just as confused as to what's going on and what you can do about it to start getting better. Now, maybe over the years, over the decades, the medical community has gotten better at either giving you handouts or educational material of things that you can do on your own. But listen, having a tear off sheet of step 1, 2, 3, here's a checklist of things to do, is not the same as having someone guide you through a process, or, engaging in your own deep learning, do it yourself approach, where you're learning details that tend to get glossed over in an allopathic or a conventional setting. Again, maybe in the conventional community, they're doing a better job of referring you out to, say, a nutritionist or a dietitian, because at least they recognize that diet needs to change. Diet, lifestyle, and environment are, like I said, they're the biggest three levers that you can pull, that you have some influence over, that you can start working on restoring wellness and vitality, rather than just simply going, okay, I have a disease to manage, and that's just my lot in life. So that's the first part of the paradigm mismatch. So again, let me just kind of review. I talked a little bit about genotype and phenotypic expression. Everything that is happening to you with your health and your well-being, or with whatever disease you might have been diagnosed with, is a phenotypic expression. It's your genes being filtered through the influence of choices that you've made in your diet and lifestyle, as well as the consequence of how your body is reacting to the environment that you live in. That is a scientific maxim, if you will. So understand your genotype, understand your phenotype, understand that in the long run, even though there may be a time and a place where conventional medicine is the right choice to make, I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of things that need to change don't fall into the realm of drugs and surgery. Like, if all you're doing is trying to figure out a better medication to take, or a different dose of the same medication, then you're probably not asking the right questions of the right people. And so again, the paradigm mismatch, it's got 4 different elements to it. The first thing is to understand that you're probably looking for something different than what your conventional doctors can provide. And that's okay. If someone just doesn't do it, they just don't do it. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's be honest about it. Let's be upfront about it. So at least you can start exploring other options. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. We'll call that episode a wrap. As always, thanks for being here. I truly appreciate it. I know I've said it probably too many times, but thank you for all the support you gave me in 2022. 2023 is shaping up to be something truly amazing and awesome. So we have lots of good things to come over the next year. Next time when we meet, we'll talk about at least the fact that the conventional system trains their doctors to think in very black and white terms. You either have a disease or you don't. Well, that's not the same as seeing health and well-being as a continuum and as a spectrum. You can lose a little bit of health and well-being and suffer, but still not have a disease to be diagnosed and managed. And so you end up in no man's land, where all the people you go and ask questions about, they're like, I don't know what's wrong, because everything is normal. You don't have a disease, so maybe it's all in your head. All right, we'll clear that up on the next episode. Please rate and follow this. Just share this with somebody that you love. Let's get the word out that you can start building your own health and vitality, becoming autonomous in your health and well-being. All right, this is Dr. Ann. I'll see you in the next episode.